to find the soul of America. A magazine went looking for the worst river in the country. Not the mighty Mississippi, not the Colorado carving its canyons. They wanted the South Platte, a shallow, muddy, disappointing trickle that old-timers dismissed with a single line: too thick to drink, too thin to plow. A nothing river. And that, the editors said, is exactly why we chose it. Because along that forgotten water sits a small Colorado town called Centennial, and buried under its streets is the whole story of a continent. Every people who ever stood on this ground believed the land was theirs forever. Every single one of them was wrong. This is the story of who they were, what they took, and the one thing that outlasted them all. Because the land was here first, and the land always has the last word. Start before there were people, before there were names. 100 million years ago, the place that would become Colorado lay under a warm inland sea. Then the earth shrugged. Deep forces buckled the crust, and the Rocky Mountains rose, raw, enormous, indifferent. Rivers tore rock into gravel and carried it east, laying down the great high plains grain by patient grain. The land shaped two twin stone towers on the prairie, weathered and red, that would one day be called Rattlesnake Buttes, a landmark watching over everything to come. No one owned this. No one could. It simply was, beautiful and brutal and waiting. Michener's point lands before a single human speaks. The plains had a nobility that would never diminish, but only, he warns, if men treated them with respect. Most never would. And the land was keeping count. The first tenants weren't human. They were the animals, and they wrote the rules the humans would inherit. A great long-necked dinosaur drank at a prehistoric river, lived her slow years, and died in the mud, sinking into the record of the stone. Ages turned, and on these same plains, something small and strange appeared. A dog-sized creature with too many toes, the earliest horse. It was born here, on this soil. Then, mysteriously, the horse vanished from the Americas entirely, gone for thousands of years. Remember that, because one day it would come back and change everything. The bison arrived in their oceans of millions. The beaver built its dams. For 100 centuries, the animals held the land in a fragile, working balance. They took only what they needed. They were the last tenants who ever did. Then came man, and the first men understood something the later ones would forget. Picture a hunter on the open plain 11,000 years ago, chipping a stone blade to a killing edge, trailing mammoths across the grass. His descendants became the tribes, and on this stretch of the Platte, one people took root and called themselves simply our people, the Arapaho. To them, the land was not property, it was a relative. They followed the buffalo, buried their dead in its soil, and read the weather like scripture. A young warrior named Lame Beaver rose among them, a man who counted his honors in acts of courage, who married, who raised a daughter named Clay Basket. The Arapaho believed, with their whole hearts, that this ground was theirs forever. For a while, it truly seemed to be. Lame Beaver made a discovery that should have made him a king. Instead, it doomed everything he loved. On a hunt near the mountains, he found soft yellow metal in a stream, gold. But to the Arapaho, gold was worthless, too soft for a blade, too heavy to carry. So Lame Beaver did the only sensible thing. He melted it down and cast it into bullets, and fired his fortune away across the plains without a second thought. He died as he lived, a warrior of his people, certain the world would always be as it was. But that yellow metal he threw away was the one thing that would bring the outsiders swarming. His gold was a fuse, already lit. The Arapaho's golden age was real. It was also the last time these plains would belong to the people who loved them. The land was about to change hands again. The first white man on this river didn't come to conquer. He came to take one thing and leave. He never left. His name was Pasquinel, a stocky French-Canadian trapper who paddled up the Platte hunting beaver pelts, the soft gold of his age. He was tough, charming, and utterly without a home. He took an Arapaho wife, Clay Basket, Lame Beaver's own daughter. and started a family on the plains. But Pasquinel also had a wife waiting in St. Louis. 2 families, 2 worlds, one restless man who belonged fully to neither. He partnered with a quiet Scottish trapper, Alexander McKeag, and together they worked the streams year after year until the beaver, once endless, grew scarce. They had trapped the animal nearly to nothing. The takers had arrived, and the land, patient as stone, added it to the count. Pasquinel's greatest legacy wasn't the fortune he chased. It was his sons, and they were born into a wound that would never heal. Half Arapaho, half French, Jake and Mike Pasquinel belonged everywhere and nowhere. To the white settlers, they were savages. To some of the tribes, they were tainted by white blood. They grew up watching wagons appear on the horizon like a rising tide, more each year than each month. Their father was a bridge between the races. But bridges get walked over. As the 2 worlds began to grind against each other, his sons hardened into something dangerous, men with nothing left to lose, and a growing list of reasons for rage. The trickle of newcomers was becoming a flood, and leading one of those wagons was a heartbroken young butcher who had crossed a continent to disappear. Levi Zendt left Pennsylvania in disgrace, with a girl the world had thrown away, to chase a rumor of a better life. A gentle Mennonite butcher cheated out of his family's farm. Levi married Elly Zendt, a penniless orphan nobody wanted, loaded a wagon, and pointed it west toward Oregon. The pioneers had a phrase for the journey ahead: seeing the elephant. It meant facing the one enormous ordeal that would break most people who tried it. The trail nearly broke them. A treacherous guide, Sam Purchase, led them across a killing land of thirst and danger, and turned his greed on Elly herself. They survived him. They survived the crossing. And when they reached that sorry little river, the South Platte, Levi looked at the muddy water and the endless grass and stopped. He would go no further. Right here, he decided. He would build. He called it Zendt's Farm. Levi built his trading post with his own hands, and for one bright season, believed he had finally found peace. The land let him believe it. Elly, the orphan no one had wanted, became the heart of the little post on the Platte, planting, tending, dreaming of the family they'd raise on this ground they'd crossed a continent to reach. Then, on an ordinary day, she stepped where a rattlesnake lay coiled in the grass. She died out there, on the land she loved, with everything still ahead of her. Levi Zendt learned what the Arapaho already knew, and every people after him would have to learn again. This ground gives generously, and then, without warning or malice, it takes. It is not cruel. It is simply older and larger than any human hope. Zendt's farm would grow into a town, but it was built on a grave, the first of many. For one shining moment, it looked like the 2 worlds might actually share the land instead of fighting for it. In 1851, the tribes of the plains, thousands of Arapaho, Cheyenne, Sioux, gathered near Fort Laramie for the largest peace council the West had ever seen. The government promised them the land was theirs, protected forever. Chief Lost Eagle, a good and trusting man, believed it. He carried an American flag and later a peace medal as proof of the white man's word. Levi Zendt was there. So was an honest army officer, Maxwell Mercy, who meant every promise he made. The paper was signed. The pipe was smoked. Both sides went home believing peace was possible. But peace requires that promises be kept, and out on the frontier, a very different kind of man was rising. A man who looked at Lost Eagle's people and saw only a problem to be solved. Not every white man wanted to share the plains. Some wanted them empty. Colonel Frank Skimmerhorn was a militia officer consumed by a private burning hatred of every native person alive. Where Maxwell Mercy saw human beings with a signed treaty, Skimmerhorn saw vermin. He gathered volunteers, stoked their fear, and waited for an excuse, any excuse, to erase the tribes from the land the treaty had guaranteed them. The paper promises of Fort Laramie meant nothing to him. And out on the plains, Pasquinel's half-breed sons, Jake and Mike, had finally chosen a side, squeezed out of both worlds. They'd turned raider, striking back at the settlers who despised them, and handing men like Skimmerhorn exactly the excuse they'd been hungering for. The land had watched the Arapaho believe it was theirs forever. Now it would watch that belief die in a single winter dawn. Chief Lost Eagle did everything right. It did not save his people. He had made peace. He flew the American flag over his camp, the very flag he'd been told meant safety. His village on the plains was full of families, mothers, elders, children, the old and the young, the ones too peaceful to run. At dawn, Skimmerhorn's men came anyway. Lost Eagle ran out waving that flag, crying in English, "Stop! This is a mistake!" Because he still, even then, believed the promise. There was no mistake. Someone gave the order, and the guns opened on a sleeping village that had been told it was under protection. Michener does not let us look away, and neither will we name the horror in detail. What matters is the betrayal at its heart. A people were destroyed not in battle, but in trust. The Arapaho who believed the land was theirs forever were swept off it, and the land, which was here first, kept the count. The tribes were gone. The buffalo were going. Into that emptiness rode the men who would become American legend, and they too thought the grass was theirs. It became a legend of the West, and to this day men swear it happened just so. A tough ex-Confederate named R.J. Poteet gathered a great herd of wild longhorn cattle in Texas and drove them 1,000 miles north, across rivers and badlands and stampedes, to the fresh grass of the Platte. Among his riders was an orphan boy, Jim Lloyd, who could barely stay in the saddle and who would grow into the finest cowman the territory ever produced. The great drives brought the cattle kingdom. Where the Arapaho had followed the buffalo, the cowboys now followed the herd. A new people had claimed the land, wilder and freer than any before them, and just as certain that it would last. The open range didn't stay wild and free for long. Money found it, and money came from an ocean away. An English promoter named Oliver Seccombe looked at the endless free grass and saw a fortune. He gathered British investors, bought and fenced enormous stretches of the plains, and built the Venneford Ranch, a cattle empire so vast, a rider needed days to cross it. Jim Lloyd, the orphan cowboy, became its beating heart, running the herds with a skill no aristocrat's money could buy. And a black cowboy named Nate Person rode those same ranges, proof that out here a man's worth could, for a moment, be measured by his work. The cattle barons believed they'd tamed the plains at last. They'd fenced it, branded it, bought it with foreign gold. They ran their empire as if the land had finally submitted. The land let them think so, the way it always did. Right up until the winter, it didn't. While the cattlemen tried to own the plains, one stubborn immigrant did something almost no one else had. He asked the land what it wanted. Hans Brumbaugh, everyone called him Potato, came chasing Colorado gold and found something better. He noticed that the despised Platte, too thin to plow, could be coaxed. So he dug ditches, bent the river into his fields, and made the dry ground bloom with vegetables where everyone said nothing would grow. Irrigation. He didn't conquer the water, he cooperated with it. And that is Michener's quiet verdict, whispered under all the gunfire and glory. The trappers took the beaver and left. The hunters would take the buffalo and leave. But the man who worked with the land instead of against it, the man who gave something back, put down roots that held. Brumbaugh's ditches would outlast every cattle empire. The takers passed through. The stewards stayed. To see the difference between taking and keeping. Watch what happened to the buffalo. They had covered these plains in herds beyond counting, the beating heart of the whole ecosystem, the larder of the tribes for 10,000 years. Then, men like the hunter Amos Callender arrived with heavy rifles and a railroad to carry the hides east. They shot the buffalo by the 1,000, then the 100,000, then the million. They took the skins and left the meat to rot in the sun. In barely a decade, the endless herds were reduced to scattered bones bleaching on the grass, an entire species brought to the edge of nothing for quick money. It was the same lesson, written in blood: the beaver, the buffalo, and one day the water. The land offers abundance. Strip it faster than it can heal. And you don't just kill the animal, you start a debt. And the land, patient as stone, never forgets a debt. The cattle barons had grown rich and proud, running more cattle every year on grass they believed would never fail. Then came the winter of 1886. For a few golden seasons, the ranches printed money. Cattle covered the plains. British investors toasted their genius. The open range seemed like a machine that could only pay out. They overstocked it recklessly, sure the good years would run forever. Then the blizzards came, weeks of them. Temperatures that froze cattle where they stood, snow that buried the grass under iron crust. By spring, the plains were a graveyard, whole herds simply gone. Fortunes that had taken decades to build vanished in a single howling winter. Oliver Seckham's grand empire cracked. The land had let the cattle kings believe they'd conquered it. Then, in 90 days, it reminded them who was here first. Every people learned the same truth in turn, and still the next people refused to believe it. Every town has a founding story it tells in daylight. Centennial had another one, buried in the dark. By now, Zendt's farm had a new name, Centennial, christened in 1876 for the nation's 100th birthday, and it was growing into a real town with real money. Into it drifted Mervyn Wendell, a smooth traveling actor with empty pockets and a hungry family. When a prosperous newcomer named Soren Sorensen arrived with cash, Wendell murdered him for it, quietly, and used the stolen money to launch his family into respectability. The one man who suspected the truth, Sheriff Axel Dumere, chased it for years and could never quite make it stick. So the Wendells rose, pillars of the community, their fortune, built on a corpse no one would name. It's the town's dirty secret and Michener's sharpest irony. The prosperity everyone admired had a body under its foundation. Some debts to the land and to the truth. Just wait. The next fortune out of Centennial came from a humble crop, and it was harvested on the bent backs of people the town used and discarded. The magic new money was the sugar-beet, a tough root that thrived in the irrigated valley Brumbaugh had pioneered. But beets demanded brutal stoop labor. Thousands of hours bent double in the mud. So the growers imported the workers, first Japanese families, then, in great waves, Mexicans. Among them came a quiet, determined man named Tranquilino Marquez, who fled the chaos of revolutionary Mexico to break his body in Colorado's beet fields so his children might have a future. He and his people did the work no one else would touch, and were paid in prejudice and poverty for it. Yet they stayed. They put their own roots down in that soil alongside the Zendts and the Lloyds and the Brumbaughs. Centennial was never one people. It was always all of them, even the ones it refused to see. The cruelest lie ever told on these plains was a simple one. Rain follows the plow. A generation bet their lives on it. Beyond the irrigated valley lay the high, dry grassland, land the ranchers knew should never be broken. But promoters sold it anyway to hopeful families. Plow it, plant wheat, and the rains will surely come. Earl and Alice Grebe believed it. They homesteaded a place called Line Camp, tore up the ancient prairie grass that had held the soil down for 10,000 years, and planted wheat. For a few wet years, it worked. The plains bloomed gold. It looked like a miracle. They didn't know they were pulling the cork out of the earth. The grass had been the land's own skin, holding everything in place, and they had just stripped it bare, right as the sky was about to stop giving rain. Every people believed the land was theirs to command. The Grebes were about to learn, like all the rest, that it commands you. Then the rain stopped, and the land the settlers had unclothed simply rose up and blew away. Through the early 1930s, the drought clamped down and would not lift, with the protecting grass gone. The bare plowed soil dried to powder, and the wind took it. Great black walls of dust rolled across the plains, burying fences, choking cattle, sifting into every sealed room. Day turned to midnight at noon. The Grebes watched their farm, their life, lift into the sky and vanish. Alice held on with a courage that broke your heart. The land they had come to conquer was now literally leaving them, grain by grain. This was the debt come due. Take the buffalo. Take the grass. Take faster than the land can heal. And one day it collects in dust. The dryland dream ended where every claim on these plains ended, with the people gone and the land scoured and silent. Still here. It was here first. Now return to 1973, and to the historian we left on that muddy river, because his search for the soul of America ends in one remarkable man. Dr. Louis Werner, hunting for the person who best embodies Centennial's whole story, finds Paul Garrett, a rancher in his 40s who carries in his own blood nearly every thread of this saga. Zendt the settler, Pasquinel the trapper, Mercy the soldier, Lloyd the cowman, and through his grandmother Pale Star, the Arapaho, our people themselves. Everyone who ever claimed this land, the taken and the takers, runs together in Paul Garrett's veins. He is a conservationist now, which is to say he has finally learned the lesson it took 2 centuries and countless lives to teach. You do not own this land. You answer to it. Garrett looks at his inheritance, all of it, the glory and the crimes, and faces the one enemy none of his ancestors ever imagined. The greatest threat to Centennial isn't a blizzard or a war or a massacre. It's silent, it's underground, and it's running out. Beneath the plains lies a vast, ancient reservoir of water, an aquifer filled drop by drop across 10,000 years. It is what lets the dry country grow anything at all. And modern Centennial is pumping it up faster, far faster, than nature can ever refill it. Paul Garrett does the math and goes cold. We must think of the aquifer, he warns, as the permanent, invisible thing we are treating as endless. And it is not endless. It is the buffalo again. It is the grass again. The exact same mistake, one last time, on a scale that could empty the land for good. Every people believed the land was theirs to use up. Garrett is the first who understands that the water is the final buffalo, and that when it's gone, there is no next herd. So does the story end in triumph? Michener is too honest for that. It ends in November, in an elegy for a way of life going quiet. The small town is thinning out. The young leave for the cities. The interstate roars past Centennial without stopping. The great ranches shrink. The water drops, and the old certainties dissolve. Paul Garrett, heir to everything, grieves a place he loves and cannot save alone. His friend, the old folk singer Cisco Calendar, offers the truest line in the whole saga, that a man springs from the soil. But he don't spring far. We are made of the ground we stand on. We do not get to outgrow it. There's no last-minute rescue, no tidy victory, just a man on his land at dusk, holding on, refusing to let the memory of everyone who bled into this ground be forgotten. Because remembering, Michener says, is itself a kind of stewardship. Line them all up now. The Arapaho who called it home, the trapper who took the beaver, the settlers who buried their dead in it, the cowboys, the barons, the beet workers, the wheat farmers. Everyone believed the land was theirs forever. Every one of them is gone. What remains is the ground itself, the red buttes, the sorry brown river, the invisible ocean underneath, exactly as patient as it was 100 million years ago, keeping its long and perfect count. That is why a magazine looking for the soul of America found it on the worst river in the country. Because Centennial isn't really the story of a town. It's the story of a hard truth every generation has to relearn. You can conquer a people, but you cannot conquer a place. You can only borrow it, steward it, and hand it on, or use it up and vanish. The land was here first, and Paul Garrett, standing at dusk, believes it may still be the best remaining spot on Earth if this time we finally listen. Because the land will have the last word. It always has. Every person in this story thought they were the main character. The land knew they were all just passing through. That's the quiet genius of Michener Centennial. It zooms out so far that human triumph and human cruelty both shrink to their true size, and the real hero turns out to be the ground under everyone's feet. The takers left, the steward stayed, and the bill for 200 years of taking is coming due in a drying well. If this story moved you, ask yourself Paul Garrett's question about your own corner of the world. Are you a taker or a steward? Tell me in the comments what you'd fight to hand on. If you made it this far, you already understand what most of Michener's characters never did. The land was here first, and it will have the last word. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the biggest stories ever written, one book at a time.